Thanks, Robert. There's almost a throwaway remark at the end of that passage. Matthew tells us oh, by the way, the number 5,000 was just the number of men. There were women and kids there too. The other gospel writers only mention 5,000. I think John says there were 5,000 in all. The others say 5,000 men. But only Matthew tells us this extra bit. There were women and kids there too. So that puts a rather different complexion on the scene, doesn't it? Well, this next picture, there we have Renaissance art for you. This is, some of you will recognize this as being by Ambrosius the Elder. No? I'm not quite sure what's going on here. I think that might be Jesus in the middle with the red robe, do you think? Peter's usually portrayed as bald, so that's probably him to the left, but exactly what he's doing there, a strange posture. The little boy who brought the loaves and the fishes are probably there. What these other characters are doing, I have no idea. But that's one image of it. I prefer the next one, which is maybe not high art by any means, but I think this captures maybe a little more of the atmosphere, because it's got all the different kinds of people there. We had 2 of our grandchildren staying with us the week before last. They're age 4 and 7. And it's amazing how riotous just 2 children can be. You tend to forget from your own ones. And of course, they were much more orderly then in those days, weren't they? So it can be a bit of a shock when they come for a week. And we end up absolutely worn out. So we're talking about thousands here. The total number could easily have been 10 to 15,000. Someone's even estimated there might have been 25,000 people here. So it's certainly not 5,000 people. It was a big crowd, whatever. And these people were all really excited. They weren't actually there to listen to a sermon. They were there for healing. That's what they came for. And we're told that Jesus moved amongst them, between the different groups, curing the sick. Despite all that exhaustion and his human longing to be alone, he moved amongst them all day, healing their sick. Now, this is the only miracle that's reported by all the 4 gospel writers. And they each have a slightly different emphasis and slightly different details. But we must ask ourselves, why did they all think it was such an important episode that they all had to include it in their gospel account? It must be more than just a remarkable story about food. And indeed, there is a lot more to it than that. Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John saw something here which had a message about the past, about the present, and about the future. So what was the connection to the past? Well, the Israelites there, the Jews there, would have known their history well. And they would have been remembering about the provision of God in the desert. When Moses took the people out of Egypt, from slavery in Egypt, they went into the desert, and before long the people were complaining and saying, "Oh, this is awful. We've got nothing here to eat, there's no water, this is miserable. We're much better off being slaves in Egypt." So they had to ask God. Moses went to God and asked, and God had heard the pleas, and he provided water, he provided food. And the food came in the form of manna, which came down in the night. It was there in the morning when they got up, and they went out to the encampment, and there was the manna, this strange powder-like thing, which they collected in, and they were able to make into bread. And they collected it every day, apart from, as some of you might remember, on the Sabbath. They got two quantities the day before, and so they had enough for the Sabbath day as well. So a provision of food, an abundance of food, would have recalled that history. But it also connected to two of the great prophets, Elijah and Elisha. There was a story about Elijah when he was staying with a widow who had no food to offer him. And he said, just go into your jar of meal and your jug of oil, just use them, make me some bread, and they won't run out. And they didn't. All the time he was there, the food never ran out. There was an episode with Elisha feeding 100 men with 20 loaves of barley. And it says in that passage, they ate and had some left. So people would be seeing the parallels and saying, this connects us to our history, the history of God's people. We're linked to our ancestors and what we're doing here. But what about the present? The question in everybody's mind must have been, who is this guy? How is he able to do this? But there was something about Jesus, not just this miracle, but to bring a crowd of maybe 15,000 people with kids running around and all that going on. How can you get control of a crowd like that? We all know what crowds look like. We've seen some pictures recently of crowds invading that enclave of Spain. It's uncontrollable. That's what these kind of numbers can do. But somehow, Jesus has the calm authority which gets them all to sit down in groups on the grass. Who is this man? Well, he is obviously a man because he experiences tiredness and stress just like they did. But no ordinary mortal could do what he'd just done. So here, some of them would certainly have thought, here is the proof that Jesus is the long-awaited Messiah. Here is the new Moses, the leader in the desert. Moses had said, the Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your own people, and you shall heed such a prophet. And that was taken at that time as a messianic prophecy. This is what the new Messiah would do. He'd be like Moses, and he would provide for us. So here too is an indication of what Jesus and his disciples had been preaching, the nearness of the kingdom or the reign of God, the breaking in of God's rule into the world, unconstrained by the laws of nature. And here it was for them to see. There was another message, though, that some of them would have picked up. And it's a political message. They're in the Roman Empire. And the subjects of the Roman Empire were told of all the great benefits that the empire would bring them. And one of those benefits was food. Didn't always work out like that. Sometimes the food supply wasn't that great. But generally, certainly in that part of the Roman Empire, it was pretty good. A lot of the grain coming up from Egypt. With a growing cult of the emperor was being portrayed by that time as this godlike figure who provided for his people. So when Jesus said to his disciples, when they came to him, he said to them, well, you give them something to eat. It may have been seen by the authorities, certainly, as a subversive statement. The emperor provides the food, not these disciples. So this was undermining, questioning imperial propaganda. And of course, that's what Jesus did. He provided the food, not the emperor. Ultimately, the earthly empire of Rome was bound to clash with the heavenly kingdom, and so it would. So these were the things of the present. It was having a big impact. And we know it was taken politically because in John's Gospel, he tells us at the end of that, Jesus had to move away again because a lot of the people were trying to make him king. So they were saying, we don't need the emperor anymore. Here's our king. This Jesus will do for us. But there were also pointers in this episode to the future. And this was perhaps the most important thing. For the disciples, it was a lesson in how their ministry was going to work. Jesus got them involved in the miracle. They had to take the food to the people. And when the food ran out that they had no choice but to go back to Jesus for more. Jesus spoke about this miracle later on, and also about the feeding of the 4,000, another separate episode. And it's clear when the discussion was kind of confusing because the disciples were at cross purposes with Jesus. They thought he was just talking about food, but it turns out Jesus was talking about learning, teaching. And so he was using the multiplication of food as a pointer to the spreading of the gospel. So the implication for the disciples is that the same principle would apply. They would have to continually return to Jesus to be replenished. They would have to lead a life of worship and prayer and learning if they were to be effective. And of course, what applies to those disciples applies to us in spades. Now, it's often said that Jesus only has our hands and our feet in this world to work through. And I would say to you that's not true. He does indeed work through us. He works through our abilities, our talents, our resources. But God is never limited by us, his created people. And God does intervene himself in the world, as he did then and as he still does now. So we can't do it all, and we shouldn't think that we can. That's the way to get stressed out. But what we're being told here is about our spiritual dependence on God. Jehovah Jireh, the Lord who provides feeding, but also spiritual nourishment. A lesson for disciples. But there's one more thing I want to draw attention to here. In describing what Matthew did, in describing what Jesus did, Matthew is very deliberate in his choice of words. Now we could have the next slide. So in that passage that Robert read for us, it says that Jesus took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish. He blessed them. He broke the loaves, and he gave them to the disciples. And those words there will remind you of another set of words. While they were eating, Jesus took a loaf of bread, and after blessing it, he broke it, gave it to the disciples, and said, "Take, eat. This is my body." The verbs that Matthew uses are exactly the same and in the same order. Took, blessed, broke, gave. Unmistakably, Matthew is foreshadowing the Last Supper, which happened 1 year later. The Last Supper took place on that dark night, surrounded by the shadows of fear and suspicion and betrayal, impending suffering and death. But here, on the grassy hillside by the lake, and we can have that picture again. Yes, there. That's a celebration, with joyful men and women and children enjoying the extravagant, abundant blessing of God. And here we have a picture of the heavenly banquet referred to by Isaiah. Ho, everyone who thirsts, come, buy, eat. Come buy without money and without price. Eat what is good and delight yourselves in rich food. That's a picture of heaven. It's what we look forward to every time that we share in the communion. What a contrast with that Last Supper, but also a much greater contrast with the banquet which comes earlier in that chapter, where in a debauched evening, Herod makes a foolish promise and ends up ordering the beheading of John the Baptist. That debauched celebration, that banquet, is nothing like this glorious celebration on the grass. Everyone ate their fill. At the end, 12 baskets of leftovers were gathered up. Later, at the feeding of the 4,000, 7 baskets were gathered up. There's more than enough for everyone. The gospel is the spiritual food from God, and he gives generously, abundantly to those who come in this life and in the next.